Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jan Śrowiński. Greenland has emerged as an unlikely political flashpoint of 2026, with Donald Trump most recently threatening tariffs on countries that don't go along with his plan to take over the Arctic island one way or another. Now, some EU leaders have fired back with visions of NATO falling apart if the US moves forward with its plan, although Danish military commanders in the Arctic region appear to be playing down the threat of an open clash. Can some sort of deal emerge out of the diplomatic fracas? Joining us here today is Wierenga, lecturer in international relations at the Baltic Defence College. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Morning, it's a pleasure to be back.
Pleasure here as well. And Donald Trump has threatened tariffs. Now, does it show his determination, or is this a sign that we're moving away from the looming threat of some sort of military confrontation and towards hard negotiations over the future of Greenland?
I think it indicates both. Although the rhetoric from the U.S. president has been unprecedented and very harsh and aggressive in nature about saying the U.S. will get Greenland the easy way or the hard way, I do not think that it is going to come to any type of kinetic conflict between allied countries against each other. And I also don't think that we're going to see the end of the alliance. Of course, I understand the concern that comes from allied countries, but I think that NATO will weather through this. And I think that one of the issues here is the way in which the president speaks about things, the U.S. President Donald Trump speaks about things, and the way in which events actually take place. And of course, there's a lot of concern about the Arctic being a new era of great power competition. There was a recent book that came out last year called America in the Arctic, which discusses how much in common the current situation has with the Great Game of the 19th century, and that cooperation between Russia and China has been growing since 2022. And there's, the region is very resource rich. So of course, that's something for allied countries to pay attention to, especially Arctic member states. But with the United States strategy during the second Trump administration, there's a lot of attention on the U.S.'s own neighborhood.
So the crucial question is, does the U.S. need Greenland for these purposes? And we're talking about securing trade routes, we're talking about natural resources, but also missile defense. And my question is, would it be necessary to ensure that any missiles flying from the direction of, say, the Middle East or Russia could be intercepted? Some skeptics say that it is not essential, and instead, for example, the interceptors could be positioned in a military base in upstate New York. But is it really as easy as that?
Well, I mean, the issue is that the president has said that there's not much Denmark can do about it if Russia or China wants to occupy Greenland. But I think that that's also not realistic. But if that were the case, that is the strength of the alliance right there, is that we are 32 allied nations. And so the position of Denmark and the vast majority of allied countries, and the vast majority of security experts, myself included, is that giving the existing treaties, coupled with Denmark's status as one of America's most reliable and strongest partners, Washington has all the access they need to make sure that Greenland does not become a security threat for them if Russia and China were to become more active. So I think that getting back to your initial question is that there will be an increased U.S. presence, but it won't be. It'll be short of taking the island by force. And I think we have to look at the meeting in Washington between the Danish and Greenlandic foreign minister with Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio. They had a closed-door meeting, and it was frank but constructive. And I think out of that comes a working group. And despite the fact that Trump is doubling down on Greenland, you see there's an allied presence there. And I think that really fulfills two functions. Of course, it politically says that allied personnel are on Greenland right now. And that's a political message because that if the president were to try and take the island by force, which again I don't think he's going to do. Allied soldiers are there, but it also demonstrates to the U.S. that this is another area, with NATO having a 360-degree approach, that European allies are taking seriously. And it looks like there will be some sort of presence, maybe like the FLF on NATO's northeastern flank, which the U.S. is, of course, more than welcome to take part of.
So what do you think is the objective of the U.S. administration, going beyond the stated goals of the operation? So, securing this territory or at least securing enhanced presence there. Do you think that the U.S. wants to reaffirm the sort of leading role and perhaps show that, okay, if you want to be in this alliance, sometimes you will need to swallow a bitter pill, like some sort of shift in the status of Greenland? Because some people say, well, that with respect to Western European countries in particular, there are tensions between the current US administration and these governments, and they are still struggling to find a new equilibrium.
Well, I think that in order to explain that, you have to look at you have to go back in NATO's history to look at how it was set up and the specific role of the U.S. that the U.S. played in that throughout the history of the alliance. And of course, all now 32 allies are equal in status, but of course, in terms of the power that they exercise individually, you do have individual member states that do have a certain sway, such as the United States. We can debate perhaps a different time whether or not we're still in a unipolar world order or a bipolar or multipolar world order, but the U.S. is present in all of those scenarios as a great power. And I think that coupling that, you have to look at some of the previous frustration that a lot of different administrations have had about defense spending. And one of the things that I think that European allies have been exceptional at is very quickly agreeing to raise defense spending and address the security architecture of Europe, therefore proving to the current president and the administration that they are ready and willing to take this seriously. And the counter to that is, why isn't everyone doing it? Sometimes these things do take time. And then the third aspect that I would put to that is the way in which this current president negotiates. I mean, if you read his book, The Art of the Deal, or if you watch how he has conducted himself since he's been a politician, it's very evident that he uses heavy-handed negotiating tactics to get what he wants. And when that becomes similar to what he's doing in Greenland, that can have ramifications. But I think it's also important to look at it from the flip side, from other allied perspectives. I don't think it's very wise to start coddling up to China. I mean, the Canadian Prime Minister visited Beijing recently and said that Canada and China are entering a new era of relations, and the United States and Canadian bilateral relationships arguably at its lowest point in modern history. So I think it's important to keep in mind allied cohesion no matter what.
And that's a very interesting point, because there were certain rather outlandish and exotic opinions appearing in the public debate recently, even in our region, saying, well, if the United States is moving away from its position of a beacon of democracy, should we perhaps side with China instead? I mean, what would you say to these, to these options? Because we still do have a country like China, which is backing up the Russian aggression of Ukraine, at least under the table, not openly, and a country that has a very different cultural paradigm. Even if the United States is changing, do you think that the point still stands that in terms of shared values, Europe remains closer to the US than it does to China?
Absolutely. I think that should be a fundamental pillar to any diplomat, politician, or anyone involved in the alliance, is that this is worth preserving, because even if the president of the United States were to enact people's worst fears, there would be all kind. I do think that the alliance could. I don't think he would do that, And there's a lot of backlash, bipartisan backlash from both Republicans and Democrats in the Congress and the Senate about Greenland. And I just think that, he will realize that this is worth preserving. It's worth. The U.S. makes allies stronger, but allies do make the United States stronger. And I think that this is a showcase for multilateralism. And here is where EU member states and European allies play a role, because as you pointed out, just swapping the U.S. for another great power, well, the other one of those do not really value, they don't share the same values, and they are more aggressive with very much less incentive to curb this behavior. The U.S. will have another presidential election in a couple of years, and it's way too early to say who the candidates are going to be. We have a couple of guesses, such as the vice president, but on the Democratic side, we just don't know how that's going to unfold. And I think that one of the things that tends to steal the attention is the headlines based on the way that certain issues are framed in the media, and that the underlining perspective here is that allies can overcome crises through diplomacy. And I think that that's what we're seeing here with these recent talks with the Danish and Greenlandic foreign ministers.
Now, looking at it from the other perspective, what do you think could be the price to pay for maintaining cohesion? We do have certain tendencies within the current administration towards the European Union, and the current US administration doesn't really value the EU highly as an entity. If certain countries within NATO are requested, perhaps informally, or there is an inference from the behavior of the Trump administration that you have to choose security within NATO or the European Union, would this be a trade-off really worth making? That's a question that many people are asking today.
I don't think so. I think we still have to go with NATO. I think we still have to go with NATO. I mean,
do you think such a choice will be necessary? Do you think that it will be this sort of like black and white, simple choice between the two at some point?
I don't think so, but I think one of the things that we really need to be careful of is what we discussed in the previous question about certain people cozying up to China, which the U.S. has indicated is their primary security concern, because with a 32 member state alliance with 2 in North America and the rest within Europe, and with one of them being a unipolar power that's entering a phase of great power competition and potentially a return to spheres of influence, that's perhaps a discussion for another time. I think that diplomacy is really key and crucial here. And I think as much as you see strong-handed rhetoric from the American side right now with the current administration, one thing to be very cautious and careful of is the other side not, reacting with long-term goals in mind, medium to long-term goals in mind, as well as remembering that there's a lot of support for NATO and for the alliance in Washington.
So it is a complexity that has to be appreciated. Unfortunately, for the time being, our time is up. Still, thank you very much for joining us here today. Wierenga was our guest here on TVP World. Once again, I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And I'm Emilia Szrewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please do stay with us.